What secrets lay hidden in the dusty corners of medieval libraries, whispering tales of forbidden power and dangerous knowledge? What happened to the brave souls who dared to seek them out, risking excommunication, torture, or even the ultimate price of their own lives? This is about the medieval period, from the 5th to the 15th centuries. Number 1. The Book of Abramelin the Mage. The Book of Abramelin the Mage, often dated to the 15th century, arrived in Europe as a curious and immensely dangerous text. It presented itself not as a typical grimoire of simple spells, but as a detailed, demanding guide to a profound spiritual and magical transformation. It was a written account supposedly by a man named Abraham of Worms for his son Lamech, detailing how he had learned the secrets of true magic from an Egyptian Kabbalist named Abramelin. The heart of the book was a detailed, lengthy ritual, demanding a full 18 months of intense dedication, purification, and devotion, all aimed at achieving knowledge and conversation of your holy guardian angel. This phrase alone hinted at a spiritual quest of the highest order, promising direct communion with a divine entity. For a medieval scholar, even one driven by piety, this was walking a knife edge. Pursuit of spiritual knowledge was highly encouraged by the Church, but the methods prescribed in Abramelin diverged wildly from accepted Christian practices. The book instructed the practitioner to isolate themselves, maintain strict chastity, pray regularly, and dedicate themselves to certain meditations. This part might have seemed pious enough on the surface. However, the subsequent steps of the ritual delved into territory that was explicitly forbidden and deeply feared by the Church. Once the holy guardian angel was contacted, the book described how the angel would then assist the practitioner in gaining power over a hierarchy of demons. These demons, once brought under control, could then be commanded to achieve various worldly ends, finding hidden treasures, inflicting curses, creating illusions, or even gaining power and influence. This blending of divine aspiration with demonic manipulation was a theological nightmare for medieval authorities. The Church vehemently taught that any interaction with demons, even seemingly for good ends, was a pact with the devil. Such pacts were considered the gravest heresy, an open rebellion against God, and the ultimate act of spiritual treason. A scholar found to be possessing, or even worse, attempting to practice the rituals within the Book of Abramelin the Mage, faced terrifying consequences. The very act of engaging with the text suggested a willingness to traffic with infernal forces, which was grounds for immediate and severe punishment. Imagine a learned cleric, perhaps a university student, disillusioned with the scholastic debates of the day or simply seeking a more direct and potent spiritual experience. They might come across a whispered rumor of this book, or perhaps a fragment copied on obscure parchment. The allure of direct divine revelation of mastering the hidden forces of the universe would have been immense, but the risk was just as great. If their secret was discovered, they would be subjected to the full wrath of the ecclesiastical courts. This could mean excommunication, a spiritual death sentence that severed them from God and community. It could mean torture, designed to extract confessions and to name accomplices. And ultimately it could mean death, often by burning at the stake, a public spectacle designed to purify the soul through fire and to deter others from similar heresies. The book detailed specific methods for commanding these demonic entities, listing their names and functions and how to compel them into service. This precise instruction on controlling demons, rather than simply exorcising them in the name of Christ, was what made Abramelin so profoundly dangerous in the eyes of the Church. It suggested a form of co-opting evil rather than simply resisting it. The detailed preparations, the long months of dedicated practice, and the secrecy required would have consumed a scholar's entire life. They would have lived in constant fear of discovery, of a whispered accusation, of an unexpected search of their chambers. While no prominent medieval scholar is known to have publicly embraced or taught from the Book of Abramelin the Mage, precisely because of the immense danger, its survival through multiple manuscript copies indicates that it was, indeed, being read, studied, and copied in secret circles. It spoke to a deep human desire for power, knowledge, and a more direct connection to the divine or the hidden forces of the cosmos, even when those forces were deemed utterly evil by the prevailing religious authority. The scholars who dared to delve into its pages were not seeking mere academic insights. They were seeking a gone, world-altering power, and in doing so they literally gambled their earthly lives and their eternal souls on its forbidden promise. The very existence of such a text, meticulously copied and preserved, testifies to the desperate longing for forbidden knowledge that could push individuals to risk everything. Number 2. Picatrix. The book known as Picatrix holds a reputation as one of the most infamous and extensive grimoires of astrological magic to circulate in medieval Europe. Its original title was Gayat al-Hakim, meaning the goal of the wise. It was a monumental Arabic text, likely compiled in Andalusia around the 11th century, and it arrived in Latin Europe through a translation made in 1256 for King Alfonso X of Castile. This translation immediately opened a Pandora's box of deeply forbidden knowledge for learned Europeans. Picatrix was not a simple spellbook. It was a vast, complex treatise on astrological magic, occult philosophy, and talismanic magic. It detailed how one could harness the powers of the planets and the stars, not just to predict the future, but to actively manipulate earthly events and influence human destinies. The book described intricate rituals for creating talismans, which were physical objects imbued with celestial energies at specific astrological timings. These talismans were believed to grant powers, protect from harm, attract love, or bring about wealth. This went far beyond mere astrology, which was a recognized, if sometimes viewed with suspicion, scholarly pursuit. Picatrix delved into natural magic, which aimed to exploit hidden sympathies in nature. But it often crossed into demonic magic, which invoked spirits and forces not of God. The Church's condemnation of Picatrix stemmed from several core principles. First, it promoted a form of astral determinism, suggesting that planetary influences could shape events and human will to a degree that challenged divine omnipotence and human free will. If one could control the stars, where did God's ultimate authority lie? Second, its methods often involved direct invocation of spirits and entities that were explicitly considered demonic. The rituals were elaborate, sometimes involving the sacrifice of animals, the use of forbidden materials, and the recitation of powerful non-Christian incantations. Such practices were unequivocally labeled as necromancy and demonolatry, direct acts of heresy punishable by the harshest ecclesiastical penalties. For a medieval scholar, the risks of possessing or studying Picatrix were immense. Discovery could lead to charges of witchcraft and heresy. Heresy trials during this period were brutal. The accused faced torture to extract confessions and to reveal other practitioners. Confession, whether true or coerced, almost inevitably led to excommunication, meaning expulsion from the Christian community and the forfeiture of any hope for salvation. In many cases, it led to the secular arm of the law carrying out the sentence of death, most commonly by burning at the stake. The public auto de fe, where condemned heretics were executed, served as a stark warning to anyone contemplating forbidden knowledge. Yet, despite these dangers, Picatrix clearly captivated the minds of some of the most intelligent men of the age. Its existence in Latin translation proves that scholars were willing to undertake the arduous task of rendering its complex Arabic into a European tongue. These were not unlearned individuals. They were scholars fluent in multiple languages, deeply immersed in philosophy and science. Figures like Marsilio Ficino, a prominent Renaissance Neoplatonist, are known to have been aware of and influenced by its ideas, though they would have navigated its contents with extreme caution and often reinterpreted its more problematic magical elements. Even Roger Bacon, The Franciscan friar, known for his experimental science, is believed to have consulted texts similar to Picatrix, seeking to understand the hidden forces of the universe, pushing the boundaries of what was permissible. The detailed instructions within Picatrix for creating talismans under precise astrological conjunctions, for mixing strange substances to create fumigations, and for uttering specific invocations demonstrate a profound system of thought that offered a compelling alternative to Trayer. It presented a vision of the cosmos that was dynamic and manipulable, a universe filled with forces that a knowledgeable individual could control. This allure was strong enough to tempt scholars to risk their very lives. They would have acquired copies in secret, perhaps transcribing them themselves, hiding them in their private studies, and poring over the dangerous pages under the cover of night. The intellectual thrill of unlocking such secrets, the promise of power over destiny, was a powerful motivator, even when the shadow of the Inquisitor loomed large. The enduring copies of Picatrix serve as a silent testament to the audacious scholars who defied the overwhelming power of the Church in pursuit of forbidden knowledge. Number 3. Liber Juratis Honori, the Sworn Book of Honorius. The Liber Juratis Honorii, also known as the Sworn Book of Honorius, stands as one of the most audacious and infamous magical grimoires of the medieval period. Reputedly written in the 13th century, it claimed to be the product of a secret conclave of magicians who met in Athens to preserve their knowledge from persecution by the Church. The book's very title, the Sworn Book, referred to the solemn oath required of anyone who copied or read its contents, binding them to secrecy and to the preservation of its profound and deeply dangerous magical system. Unlike many grimoires that might focus on specific spells, the Liber Juratis presented itself as a comprehensive manual for the invocation of spirits, both angelic and demonic, for the purpose of gaining vast knowledge and immense power. Its central aim was the evocation of spirits to achieve universal wisdom, to obtain knowledge of all arts and sciences, and even to wield power over nature and human destiny. The book's boldness lay in its elaborate rituals, which involved the construction of magical circles, the use of holy names alongside infernal ones, and ceremonies that often mimicked or perverted Christian sacraments. From the perspective of the medieval Church, the Sworn Book of Honorius was an absolute abomination. Its contents were a direct challenge to God's supreme authority and a blatant endorsement of forbidden magic. The invocation of demons, even if ostensibly for good purposes, like gaining knowledge, was considered an unholy pact with the devil. The idea that a human could compel angelic or demonic entities through ritual, rather than appealing to God through prayer, was seen as blasphemy and heresy. The book's very existence, let alone its practice, was grounds for the gravest charges. For any scholar who dared to seek out, possess, or study this book, the risks were nothing short of existential. Discovery by church authorities meant immediate and severe consequences. Such an individual would be subjected to the dreaded Inquisition, a formidable ecclesiastical court dedicated to rooting out heresy. The process was designed to ensure conviction. It involved secret denunciations, detention, and relentless interrogation, often accompanied by torture. The goal was to extract a confession, and if the accused confessed to heresy, they were typically reconciled to the Church through a period of public penance, imprisonment, or even branding. However, if they maintained their innocence, or if their heresy was deemed too grave, or if they were found to have relapsed into error, they would be relaxed to the secular arm, meaning handed over to civil authorities for execution. The most common form of execution for heresy was burning at the stake, a public spectacle intended to cleanse the soul through fire and to instill fear in the populace. Scholars who delved into the Liber Juratis were often learned individuals, clerics who had access to libraries, university students exploring the fringes of knowledge, or even disillusioned monks. Their intellectual curiosity, combined with a desire for forbidden power or deeper spiritual insight beyond the bounds of orthodoxy, would have driven them to seek out such texts. They would have operated in absolute secrecy, copying the manuscript in hidden chambers, studying its intricate diagrams and powerful incantations under the cover of darkness. The book itself, in its introductory sections, warned the reader of the immense perils, urging absolute discretion. The rituals described in the Liber Juratus were incredibly complex and demanding, requiring precise astrological timings, specific tools, and a lengthy period of preparation. This complexity suggests that only highly dedicated and learned individuals would have even attempted to follow its instructions. Imagine the weight of constant fear on such a scholar. The fear of a misplaced manuscript, a whispered rumor, a suspicious neighbor, or an unexpected visit from a church official. Every page turned, every invocation considered, every diagram drawn, brought them closer to not only their intellectual desires, but also to the very real possibility of a brutal death. The sworn Book of Honorius stands as a chilling testament to the lengths some scholars would go, and the dangers they would brave in pursuit of knowledge and power that the Church deemed utterly anathema. Its survival, despite centuries of suppression, highlights the enduring human fascination with the forbidden. Number 4. The Malleus Maleficarum, the Witch's Hammer. The Malleus Maleficarum, Latin for the Witch's Hammer, was published in 1487 by two Dominican inquisitors, Heinrich Kramer and Jacob Sprenger. It rapidly became the most authoritative and terrifying manual for hunting, identifying, prosecuting, and torturing alleged witches in late medieval and early modern Europe. Impact was immense, fueling the burgeoning witch hunts that would engulf communities for centuries. Yet, ironically, for a book that became synonymous with persecution, the Malleus Maleficarum itself was a deeply controversial text, and parts of it were effectively forbidden by some ecclesiastical authorities. The book's central premise was that witchcraft was real, that witches formed pacts with the devil, and that they engaged in malevolent acts through demonic power. It provided detailed instructions on how to recognize the signs of witchcraft, how to conduct trials, the use of torture, to extract confessions, and arguments for the execution of witches. It was written with a severe, zealous tone, often equating disbelief in witchcraft with heresy. The paradox of the Malleus Maleficarum, being a forbidden text, lies in its controversial reception within the Church. While Kramer claimed the book had papal endorsement, the famous papal bull Summus Desiderantis Effectibus of 1484, issued by Pope Innocent VIII, merely authorized Kramer and Sprenger to pursue cases of witchcraft in certain regions. In fact, many theologians and legal scholars within the Church, including faculties at prominent universities, viewed the Malleus with deep suspicion and even outright condemnation. Specifically, the theology faculty of the University of Cologne, a highly respected institution, openly rejected the Malleus Maleficarum. They found its theological arguments flimsy, its legal procedures questionable, and its interpretations of Scripture and church law highly problematic. They particularly took issue with its extreme emphasis on demonic pacts and its uncritical acceptance of popular superstitions. To them, the book was not sound theology, it was dangerous zealotry. Other inquisitors and churchmen also expressed reservations, finding Kramer's methods overly aggressive and prone to abuse. Some historians argue that the book was effectively placed on a kind of informal forbidden list by parts of the intellectual establishment of the Church, even as it gained widespread popularity among secular courts and less discerning religious authorities. For a medieval scholar, especially a theologian or a legal expert, to openly criticize or reject the Malleus Maleficarum carried significant risks. In an era consumed by fear of witchcraft and demonic influence, to question the foundational text of witch hunting was to risk being seen as sympathetic to witches, or even as a heretic oneself. If a scholar too loudly argued against its principles, they could face accusations of impiety, of undermining the Church's efforts to combat evil, or even of secretly being in league with the devil. This could lead to a loss of academic position, public censure, or even a formal investigation by the very inquisitors the book empowered. The scholars at Cologne, for instance, in their rejection of Kramer's work, put their own reputations and intellectual standing on the line. They were upholding a more measured, legally sound approach to justice against a wave of popular panic and an aggressive new legal manual. Their dissent was a brave act, daring to stand against a text that, while popular, was doctrinally and procedurally flawed in their eyes. The Malleus Maleficarum itself, while a tool of persecution, became a source of intellectual contention and danger for those who had to engage with its arguments. Scholars had to decide if they would accept its extreme views or challenge them, knowing that either path involved significant personal and professional risk. If they used it, they risked committing grave injustices and violating theological principles. If they rejected it, they risked becoming targets in an era of paranoia and zealous belief. The book was a chilling example of how even a text ostensibly serving the Church could become a forbidden zone for intellectual honesty, where navigating its complex and dangerous ideas truly made scholars risk everything, even their own safety, to uphold what they believed was right. Number 5. Aristotle's Metaphysics and Physics. The works of Aristotle, the ancient Greek philosopher, might seem like an unlikely entry on a list of forbidden books. Today, he is revered as a foundational figure in Western thought. Yet, for medieval scholars in the 12th and 13th centuries, the rediscovery of Aristotle's complete philosophical and scientific works, particularly his Metaphysics and Physics, triggered a profound intellectual crisis and led to their temporary banning by the Church. These texts, translated into Latin primarily from Arabic versions, brought forth a worldview that seemed to directly contradict fundamental Christian doctrines. Aristotle's physics explored the natural world through observation and reason, proposing that the universe was eternal, without a beginning or end. His metaphysics delved into first principles and the nature of being, introducing concepts like prime mover, that, while hinting at a divine force, did not align with the Christian concept of a personal creating God who created the universe ex nihilo, out of nothing. Other Aristotelian ideas, like the unicity of the intellect, the idea that all human minds shared a single universal intellect, challenged the Christian belief in the immortality of the individual soul and personal responsibility. His emphasis on logic and empirical observation also seemed to elevate human reason above divine revelation, a dangerous notion in a faith-based society. The initial reaction from the Church authorities, particularly at the University of Paris, the intellectual heart of Europe, was one of alarm and outright condemnation. In 1210, a provincial synod in Paris banned the teaching of Aristotle's natural philosophy and his metaphysics in lectures, along with certain commentaries on his works. This ban was reissued and refined in 1215 by the papal legate Robert Corson and again in 1231 by Pope Gregory IX, though the later bans sometimes allowed for the reading of the texts, but not their public discussion or teaching. These prohibitions meant that any master or student found studying or teaching these particular works faced severe penalties, including excommunication, loss of academic privileges, and even expulsion from the university. For a medieval scholar, a ban like this was a direct assault on intellectual freedom and a serious threat to their livelihood and spiritual well-being. These texts represented a massive leap in systematic thought, offering tools for understanding the world in a way that was far more sophisticated than anything previously available. Scholars, driven by intellectual curiosity and a desire for comprehensive knowledge, were desperate to engage with Aristotle. They knew that mastering these works was key to advancing in any field of study, from theology to medicine to law. Despite the bans, many scholars continued to study Aristotle in secret. They would acquire copies of the forbidden texts, often through clandestine means, and read them in private, discussing them in hushed tones with trusted colleagues. The intellectual ferment was too strong to be suppressed entirely. Scholars like Roger Bacon, a Franciscan friar and an early advocate for experimental science, faced significant challenges and even imprisonment due to his radical ideas and his embrace of scientific inquiry, which was heavily influenced by Aristotelian natural philosophy. Albertus Magnus, a towering figure of scholasticism, made it his life's work to make Aristotle understandable and acceptable within a Christian framework, essentially daring to engage with the forbidden texts directly. The greatest example of a scholar risking everything was Thomas Aquinas. He embarked on the monumental task of synthesizing Aristotle's philosophy with Christian theology. This was an incredibly dangerous endeavor, as his work involved directly confronting the very ideas that had led to Aristotle's banning. Aquinas had to meticulously interpret Aristotle, distinguishing his own views from those deemed heretical, and showing how reason and faith could, in fact, complement each other. His daring intellectual project, while ultimately successful and grew for Christian thought, placed him in a precarious position, constantly having to defend his integration of Aristotle against accusations of heresy. The bans on Aristotle's works illustrate a critical period in medieval intellectual history. Scholars risked academic ruin, spiritual damnation, and social ostracism to engage with these powerful ideas. The very act of reading and interpreting these texts, in defiance of official decree, shaped the course of Western philosophy and theology, demonstrating the immense power of forbidden knowledge to compel individuals to risk everything for intellectual pursuit. The story of Aristotle's forbidden texts is a testament to the enduring human drive to understand the world, even when that understanding challenges the established order. Number 6. Averroes' commentaries on Aristotle. The name Averroes, or Ibn Rushd, as he was known in the Islamic world, sent shivers down the spines of many medieval Christian theologians. An eminent 12th century Arab polymath, Averroes was a philosopher, astronomer, physician, and lawyer. His most influential contribution to Western thought came through his extensive and profound commentaries on the works of Aristotle. When these commentaries, translated from Arabic into Latin, began to circulate in European universities in the 13th century, they became one of the most potent sources of forbidden knowledge, inspiring both fascination and widespread condemnation. Averroes' interpretations of Aristotle were rigorous and systematic, but they often pushed Aristotelian thought to conclusions that clashed violently with Christian dogma. His most infamous idea was the unity of the intellect. Averroes argued that there was only one universal impersonal intellect shared by all humanity, not individual immortal souls. This concept struck at the very heart of Christian belief in personal immortality, individual salvation, and free will. If there was no distinct personal soul that survived death, then the foundation of Christian ethics, heaven, hell, and individual responsibility, crumbled. Other contentious points included Averroes' view on the eternity of the world, which contradicted the Christian doctrine of creation, ex nihilo, and his emphasis on philosophical reason as a sole path to truth, which seemed to undermine the authority of divine revelation in Scripture. The reaction to Averroes' ideas, known as Averroism, was swift and severe, particularly at the University of Paris, a hotbed of intellectual debate and theological orthodoxy. The Bishop of Paris, Stephen Tempier, issued major condemnations of philosophical propositions in 1270 and again in 1277. These condemnations targeted specific Averroist doctrines directly, labeling them as heresies. The 1277 condemnation in particular listed 219 propositions, many of which were directly traceable to Averroes' influence or the radical Aristotelianism he inspired. For a medieval scholar to be associated with Averroes or to publicly advocate Averroist ideas was a profound risk. Scholars found teaching or defending these condemned propositions faced automatic excommunication, expulsion from the university, and potentially more severe punishments if they refused to recant. Their careers would be ruined, their reputations destroyed, and their very souls imperiled in the eyes of the Church. The intellectual environment became charged with suspicion. Professors and students had to be careful with their words, ensuring they did not stray into forbidden territory. Yet, despite the immense dangers, Averroes' commentaries captivated the minds of many learned men. The sheer intellectual power and clarity of his thought, his meticulous engagement with Aristotle, offered a compelling framework for understanding the world. Some scholars, often known as radical Aristotelians, dared to explore these forbidden ideas even at great personal cost. Siger of Brabant, a prominent master of arts at Paris, was one such figure. He openly discussed and seemingly embraced several Averroes propositions, arguing for the philosophical truth of concepts like the unity of the intellect, even while acknowledging their conflict with theological truth, a concept sometimes called double truth. Siger faced direct accusations of heresy and was ultimately forced to leave Paris and likely died under mysterious circumstances, perhaps imprisoned by the Church. Boethius of Dacia was another master who pushed radical Aristotelianism. Even the most revered Christian scholars had to grapple with Averroes. Thomas Aquinas, for instance, spent considerable effort refuting Averroes' positions, particularly on the unity of the intellect. But to do so, he had to first deeply engage with Averroes' arguments. This intellectual wrestling itself was a perilous task, as simply engaging with the forbidden text could raise suspicions. The debates surrounding Averroes' commentaries were not mere academic exercises. They were life and death struggles over the very nature of truth, faith, and reason in medieval Europe. Scholars who dared to read and interpret these forbidden texts, who found themselves drawn to their philosophical power despite their dangerous implications, truly risked everything. They risked their academic standing, their spiritual well-being, and even their lives, all for the sake of intellectual pursuit and the daring exploration of ideas that challenged the very foundations of their world. The continued, albeit clandestine influence of Averroes on later medieval and Renaissance thought stands as a testament to the irresistible allure of forbidden knowledge.